Representative Brady,
Here.
Representative Brett,
Here.
Representative Chestek,
Here.
Representative Filer,
Here.
Representative Kelly,
Here.
Representative Lean,
Here.
Representative Singh,
Here.
Representative Webb,
Here.
Chairman Washut.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to House Judiciary. We have a couple of bills for us today. We'll start with House Bill 197. Representative Davis, welcome to the House Judiciary Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. I'd like to present to you House Bill 197. It's a pretty good bill here. I think you'll like it here. It's limits on property development and extraction and mitigation fees. You know, as we know, we're having some issues across the state building affordable housing and things like that. And I think the more regulations we remove, the easier it is to do it. So anyway, this bill here spotlights one of the many gray areas that our developers across the great state are encountering as they strive to build our homes, affordable housing, workforce housing, and serve our commercial needs. This bill recognizes the role that home rule plays in our communities across the state. What this bill does is it defines and clarifies the process to be used when extraction and mitigation are used in the permitting process. And with that, I hope you've had a chance to read it, and I'll try to answer any questions. If not, I got two great lifelines out here.
Representative, why don't you hit the high points of the bill? Where's the meat of the bill?
The meat of the bill is this has to do with the mitigation and extraction nexus study that is occurring in some parts of our state. And we're trying to put some sideboards on this so that it doesn't run amok. You know, I mean, it's in some areas it's a little over burdensome. You know, not that mitigation and extraction aren't a valuable tool for our communities, but we need to put some sideboards on this here. This, let's see here on page, the interesting thing about this bill is it gives the people a method to protest, which is on page, where is it? Housing, that was a good question, by the way. Anyway, it gives them a process to, if they want to push back against the extraction and mitigation fees. It causes the person or the public entity that is pushing for these extraction and mitigation fees, it gives them a process to appeal it, okay? And then it's upon the land use agency that is enforcing it. So that part's good on it. We did, on this, we raised the square footage up to 3,000 square foot, which is a little larger than the state average. And then in your townhouses and stuff like that, 1,750. We put a cap on it so that if the mitigation fee is enacted and it goes through the study, it can't exceed 4%, whichever's less, which I think is helpful to you as a developer to know that, you know, that this is going to be the way it is. All right.
So Representative, let's talk about that 4%. Where'd that number come from? Is that is that the pattern? Is that the high point? Is that the low point? Where'd the 4% number come from?
Well, it's just kind of a random number out there. You know, looking at the mitigation fees and stuff like that and comparing them across the board. You know, some are high, some are low, you know, so we want to keep a cap on that, not to exceed 4%. You know, in certain areas like commercial development, stuff like that, you know, the nexus study may require a higher mitigation or extraction fee. And this assures the developer that it doesn't get too far out of whack. So that's why we put a cap in there.
So is it fair to say that the cap and the appellate process that you've developed in this bill is really the most important aspects of this?
I think it's for you as the developer, I think it gives you assurances when you're gonna state or start this project that it won't exceed that, and it gives you, this defines the process in which we're going forth with that nexus study. And so I just think it's coming across the state. We're gonna start seeing more and more of this. And, like I said earlier, home rule is very important. But when home rule gets a little out of control or running beyond what I would consider its sideboards, we need to kind of rein it in and define this. I'm not in favor of doing the community's work, but when it gets a little, what is the word I'm looking for? But when it gets outside the parameters, and is hindering the development of these projects across our state, I think we need to step in, put some sideboards on that.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Chesty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, thank you for bringing this bill. It's an interesting bill. A couple of questions for you. First of all, are these exaction fees and mitigation fees currently being charged in some communities? And are you trying to make them more uniform across the state? Is that the purpose of the bill?
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chesnick, I believe it is, I think that's where I'm talking about getting out of control. We want to, before it gets out of control, get some sideboards on this and, for the lack of better words, restrict it, make it more user-friendly for us as the developers.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, I see on page 5 that these exaction fees and mitigation fees are to be collected and accounted for in the same manner as other public funds, which makes perfect sense to me. But I guess my question is there any limitation on how those funds are to be spent by the agency that collects the fees? So we're talking about trying to provide ways to finance affordable housing. Is there any requirement that the exaction fees be spent on infrastructure or other projects that actually help to create affordable housing?
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chesnick, the reason why we put that in there, because it wasn't crystal clear. It went into a coffee can or something else, and we weren't clear as to where those funds were going. So by bringing that out and putting it in that way, there shows some clarity there and allows us to be able to track those funds.
One more follow-up?
Yeah, following up on that, but that just talks about receiving the funds. So we know, we can account for where they came from and they're put in the same general funds with the rest of the municipality's funds. But are they then part of the general fund that can spend on salaries for the police officers or anything else? I mean, it seems to me like if the purpose of this bill is to help promote affordable housing, we ought to have some requirement that the expenditure of these funds is limited to things that help make housing affordable. Infrastructure being the obvious part.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chesnick, on page 2, lines 14, 15, and 16, it kind of highlights where those funds would be put to work at. To be used to provide or offset affordable or workforce housing costs as condition of granting a land use permit. But before the reason, what I understand is it was kind of gray in there. So now that we bring that up in there and put it where you can actually identify it, you could track it and see where it's going.
Representative Chesty.
So that's a definition. It's not an operative provision that requires anybody to do anything. I guess what I would suggest, and we can work on this maybe afterwards for an amendment on the floor, that we have the definition, but it's never implemented anywhere in the bill that I could see to require the expenditures in those areas. So we can work on that outside the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative.
I do have some people that may be able to
Call a
answer
friend,
those
are you?
questions.
All right. Representative Bratton, you have a question?
Come up and introduce yourselves.
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jonathan Downing, appearing on behalf of a landowner, Wyoming landowner Kelly Lockhart, who's been dealing with this issue in his community for over 30 years. Speaking to this bill and how we got here, exactions are fees, some people would call them taxes, that are collected by governing bodies, not necessarily voted by the people within a community, to offset the cost of development. And historically, exactions traditionally would be for if you're a developer and you're coming into a community and you want to build housing, or you may want to build a commercial facility or an industrial facility, and you sit down with your local government and you say, we're going to share this cost of this development. Part of that comes from being a good neighbor, wanting to be a good corporate citizen, and saying, we'll share these costs. And so whether that's connecting to sewer, whether that's connecting to water, helping to build approaches to a development, sharing those costs of that development. Over time within Wyoming and within the West, we've had exactions and fees or taxes from our coastal areas of the country, or the areas to the south of us, where those taxes or fees have been collected on development as a means to offset other costs to a community. Some would argue that those fees or taxes end up being like a lottery for a local community, because local communities obviously struggling with costs of development, or how do you pay for government services, use exactions as those methods. And so in the community in the northwest part of the state, historically, you've had exactions being placed on development, many noble attempts to try and create affordable housing in that part of the state. And those areas have gone beyond some of these limits before in the past as far as what types of fees or taxes are being collected. And these, keep in mind, some of these exactions are not being voted on by the people. They're being voted on by a governing body. And so when we look at this issue, and this came up through the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. Part of the Regulatory Reduction Task Force for some of the new people had started back, 2017, 2018. It had come through one of the nonprofit, less government advocate groups here in Cheyenne. And part of that group had been tasked with and had worked with the legislature on to try to seek ways to make Wyoming more open for business, to try and seek ways to identify areas where you may have these hidden taxes per se. And so when we look at exactions and we look at the call for this bill, obviously landowners, when they're coming in, or developers coming in, they want to be good citizens. They want to share those costs. They want to work with their local governments. But as far as the impetus for this bill, it comes back from some of the issues that have come with housing, where local governments, because they're looking for money from multiple areas, and they've been good friends and partners for a number of years with different folks, trying to figure out what different ways to pay for that. And so when it's come into the workforce housing issue, as we were talking earlier today, it seems like it's gone a little bit out of where it needs to be checked a little bit as far as how far that's gone, as far as that reach. And so with the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, it was going, let's look at having a limit on how much those fees are collected, or being, how high those are. In some situations, those fees as a percentage are higher than what you would say your sales tax are in communities. And when you look at a 5% or 5 cent or 6 cent sales tax, that's normally voted on by the people. Exactions are voted on by governing bodies. They come to you in the form of building and development codes. And so with this bill, it seeks to restore some of those private property rights that you would have Some would argue that private property rights should be a higher level than some of these other rights that are addressed within the bill. But that's a decision for you. And so when we look at exactions, that partnership with local governments as well as with the state, it seeks to say, let's put some sideboards on there. And let's not go too far and say, or maybe we should at some point, because there have been discussions about should you even have exactions for workforce housing? Should you have exactions for allowing or sharing that cost of an approach to a subdivision? Most people would argue that that's part of that development cost. When we get into where do you limit it when you go beyond what's traditionally associated with that cost of development? And so give the broad overview. We can get more into the meat and potatoes of the bill, but in the interest of time, Mr. Manley with Pacific Legal Foundation is also here. He can give you a wide view of a lot of the legal issues that have come with exactions across the West. But in the meantime, as far as there are sometimes some good ideas that come from the coast. We like to, in Wyoming, tend to limit some of those good ideas. And I'm saying that in air quotes, but
Thank you, Mr. Downing.
thank you, sir.
Good morning. Representative Bratton had a question. Let's get down there and then we'll work down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a question for both of you about exaction fee or exaction versus mitigation. I'd like you to elaborate on both those.
Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
as Jonathan
Introduce yourself,
mentioned-
please, yeah.
Yes, I'm James Manley. I'm the State Policy Chief for Pacific Legal Foundation. And just briefly, PLF is a national nonprofit law firm. We were founded 50 years ago by members of Governor Reagan's staff, which is how we ended up in Sacramento, of all places. But we fight in courtrooms and legislatures to protect private property rights. We won 18 cases at the Supreme Court. 17 of them have to do with protecting property rights, including the case that brings us here today, Sheets versus El Dorado County, where the Supreme Court said these exaction and mitigation fees are subject to the Constitution and need to be constrained in order to comply with the Constitution. To your question, the bill uses those terms interchangeably. There really isn't a difference in the bill between an exaction and a mitigation fee. The only way that this, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but the only way that an exaction can be constitutional is if it's mitigating some impact that the development is having. So it might be clearer just to call them mitigation fees rather than exactions, but the distinction there is an unconstitutional exaction would be extortion. It would be, as the Supreme Court has said, out-and-out extortion to require something from someone that isn't directly related to the impacts that their development is causing. Whereas a mitigation fee addresses an impact that the development is actually causing, which is really what this bill is focused on, is ensuring that local communities are imposing constitutional mitigation fees and not unconstitutional exactions.
All right, thank you.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, when these fees are collected, either one, where do they go? Who's the recipient of them? What are they funding?
I'd be happy to answer that one, Mr. Chairman, Representative. So as Representative Davis pointed out, the bill does define exaction or mitigation fees as fees that are collected for the purpose of funding affordable housing and workforce housing. Also, because the fees have to be related to an identified impact of the development, they really have to be used to address that impact. And so if through this study that the bill requires, the local community identifies an impact that the development is having on the availability of affordable workforce housing, then they can assess a fee that's roughly proportionate to that impact. And so that's another reason why the money needs to be spent to address that impact and not just anything. Now, I think to Representative Chestik's point earlier, I think there is room in the bill to be clearer about what the funds can be spent on. But I think as written, it does constrain how the funds can be spent, given those factors.
Representative Justice, I think you had your hand up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to come back to that later, but maybe after the meeting. But you mentioned a Supreme Court case, Sheets versus, I forget the name. Could you explain to me, just very briefly, what that case does or says? And then how does this bill address the concerns from that case?
The operative word is briefly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative. So the Supreme Court has said for a long time that when the government charges an impact fee or requires a dedication of property in exchange for a development, building permit, that what it's asking for has to have an essential nexus to the project. So it has to be connected to the project and the impacts of the project. And it has to be roughly proportionate to those impacts. So the amount has to be proportionate. So that test in the past was not applied to legislative exactions. It only applied if those conditions were imposed along the way in the permitting process. So the difference between a legislative exaction or one that's imposed by an administrative body. What Sheets says is it doesn't matter what branch of government is imposing the exaction. If it's demanding money or property in exchange for your constitutional right to develop your property, it has to have an essential nexus and be roughly proportionate. And so that's what really brings us here today. Local communities cannot impose these fees unless they meet that constitutional test. And that's new after Sheets versus El Dorado County. And if I could just add one detail about Sheets, I think the story illustrates why we need sideboards on these fees. So George Sheets owned some property outside of Sacramento in El Dorado County. He wanted to put a mobile home on his property, retire there, raise his grandson. The county demanded $23,000 in traffic impact fees for him to place a single mobile home on his property because there were no sideboards on those fees. And so the Supreme Court put sideboards on it by saying you have to meet this test. And that's, I think, illustrates how these fees can get out of control and why we need limits on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I hear what you're saying, but what this bill does is it gives it's a new policy. It gives new authority to them to do this. So on page 9, lines, starting with line 18 under 15.1, 103, let's see, A, the governing bodies of all cities and towns may, and then we're adding, impose exaction or mitigation fees on residential or commercial development, including subject to the statute 16.3.102, an exaction or mitigation fee for affordable or workplace housing. We are adding that in, allowing them to do that, creating a new authority to do that. And let's see, A, B, and then also down, so then on page 10, starting on line 16, actually, let's go back to 18.2.101, line 10. Each organized county in the state is a body, corporate and politic. Powers of the county shall be exercised by the county commissioners, which may, and then we're adding, impose exaction or mitigation fees on residential or commercial development, including an exaction on mitigation fees for affordable or workplace housing. So we're giving an authority to do the thing that it sounds like you're arguing against. I have a concern about that. Tell me more.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I absolutely hear that confusion. There can be constitutional exactions or mitigation fees. If your development is requiring additional public expenditures to meet the demands or the impacts that your development is having, the government can ask you to pay your own way. And so there are situations where mitigation or impact fees are constitutional. My understanding is that while it's not clear that this authority exists, that's outlined on page 9 and page 10, my understanding is that the cities and counties are doing it anyways. And as I understand it, there hasn't been litigation about that. And so I think one alternative is to ban these outright. Another alternative is to put sideboards on it the way this bill does and ensure that the fees that are being charged are constitutional.
Representative Filer.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make this, so what you all are saying is pretty much that there's, without the sideboards, without the right legislation, that some municipalities have charged these fees, but also could drop it into their general fund and not actually use it towards the development or the project. So that makes the part of it where it's pretty much unconstitutional in how they're doing that. So with this legislation, adding that new on 9 and 10, what it does is it tells the municipality that, yes, you can collect these fees, but you are going to have to use them towards that development or project. So it's more of a partnership, not a tax. If I'm wrong, let me know, please.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Chairman, this is one of those situations, and also appreciate local governments working with us at the same time. Local governments can collect these and do collect these exactions currently. And so the policy decision as far as for the legislature, in the past, we have not been able to get to the stage of just an outright ban on exactions or those mitigation fees. Obviously, for certain developments and things like that, just as far as a history piece, it's you have those discussions on offsetting your cost of development where it's a shared cost between the private and the public sector. When we get into the housing mitigation fees, I don't think that was foreseen years ago when they spoke about, okay, somebody's going to help share the cost of an approach to a development. And when, just historically, when I worked for the Contractors Association, policies or issues like this would start in different parts of the state and then they would spread. And so that's what we're concerned about in trying to get sideboards in place on these types of fees within Wyoming.
Okay, a couple more questions. I think there are others in the room we need to get to. So Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Something we haven't touched on here, we were talking about these fees and how they could be a little bit out of control. We didn't specify according to whom and by what standard, but why the specific focus on affordable and workforce housing? We haven't talked about that.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Chairman, that in the northwest part of the state has been the biggest source of contention. We've had several pieces of legislation over the years dealing with this issue. Fees in some of those areas are in the hundreds, if not the millions of dollars.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon me, hundreds of thousands, if not millions.
Have you seen perhaps a pattern of resistance to affordable housing through these fees?
Mr. Chairman, when somebody is looking to develop a property and they're being told you must pay this amount if you want to develop that property, that I would say from my perspective, that limits that approach. Within the other side of that issue, they would argue that those exactions will help them offset the cost by essentially having deed-restricted government housing exactions that would cover those costs for that community.
Well, all right. Last question for these witnesses. Representative Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for the bringer. Is there any Wyoming statute in force today that empowers local counties, cities, or towns to charge fees for affordable housing?
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of that, but we have home rule, which allows them to do this. But that's all that I know. Great question. I'll try and research it though.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
close. We might have some follow-up there in a little bit, but I want to get some other people at the table and get some other perspectives. Anyone else in the room? Good morning. Introduce yourselves and tell us what you'd like to hear from.
Thank you,
your
Mr.
perspective.
Chairman. Nick Agopian, I represent the Teton County Board of County Commissioners. A lot of questions about affordable housing. This is something that is only, think about where to start. There's a lot that was said. This bill does seek to enumerate the authority as Representative Bratton identified by amending Titles 15 and Titles 18 to specify that counties are able to place these mitigation fees on new buildings to address affordable housing. In Teton County, where we have an affordable housing department, that is where those funds are go. Those funds are utilized to help support the development of affordable housing units across the county. The reason that that's so important for the county is in 2012, the county developed its comprehensive plan and has since put in place its LDRs. And one of the core values, one of the key goals that the county has established and has been approved by the community is to house 60% or more of the county's workforce within the county. This is a very unique situation in Teton County where where affordability is lacking in the marketplace there. There's a variety of reasons for that, both at the state and local level, but it is a place that people want to be. The building permits are coming in, people are continuing to show up, and with the affordable housing, it is intended through the completion of a nexus study to make an individualized determination on what the impact is and determine, I believe, and determine what is the roughly proportional amount of their impact based on their development. The gentleman from the Pacific Legal Foundation did a great job explaining that. In Teton County, that it's used as a part of development projects. The community has also exercised its right to impose a spet penny for affordable housing and has used those dollars to purchase land and then partner with developers to bring affordable housing units into the community. Those affordable housing units are managed and run by the local Affordable Housing Authority and intended to, with a variety of different tiers based on income levels and family needs. The community itself has been able to use these affordable housing mitigation fees, which we impose currently under our broad authority from the state, and consistent, we believe, with the line of cases that the attorney previously spoke about, where we are completing a nexus study, we make the individualized determination, and then the assessment is roughly proportional to the impact of that development. Since its inception, I want to say we're on track for 1,700 units in Teton County. That is success in Wyoming, significant success, and we have plans for more. And this is one element of how we work towards funding it and how the community is able to achieve the goals that are outlined in the comprehensive plan and in their LDRs. The sideboards on this, I think, are consistent, and they offer a very unique opportunity for this body to make a policy decision. The current Supreme Court cases don't identify a cap on what the mitigation is. It would be whatever the impact is that's determined in that nexus study to make the individualized determination. In this case, the body is choosing to establish a policy that 4% is the cap. So in this instance, if the individualized determination that's made shows that the impacts associated with the development are less than 4%, the individual will be charged that amount consistent with the line of Supreme Court cases. And then if it is greater than 4%, it would then be the policy of the state that's too high, and that we are just not going to impose that burden on homeowners.
Okay, we're at 8:30.
Sorry.
8:30, and I always like to remind witnesses that we're always under a time crunch. And,
Thank you. I would
Citizens
stand for any
legislation.
questions, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Chestic, question?
Thanks, Mr. Gopi. I didn't hear what's your position on the bill. Are you in
So
favor?
forgive me. If there was a
Excuse
bigger,
me.
Mr. Chairman.
To the chair.
Forgive me. Representative Chestic, if there was a bigger table, I'd hoped we would have all sat together. This bill represents a compromise position, I think, on all parties. We are in support of this bill as it's before you today. I believe the sponsor has a technical correction for this bill that we need, there's 3 places where the bill uses the term reasonably, where the intent is we would like to see it use the word roughly, so it's consistent with the line of Supreme Court cases.
Well,
Would you be supportive of an amendment that restricts the expenditure of these fees to affordable housing infrastructure and to actually serve the purpose of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, broadly, yes, and I do believe that there would be, the state has provided counties the authority to establish these local housing authorities. And so I have to believe that there's a way to wordsmith that fairly easily.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Bob McLaurin with WHAM. Formerly, I managed the town of Jackson for about 20, 25 years, so I've got a little bit of experience with this topic. We too are not opposed to this bill. We think it's a good compromise, and would not object to an amendment that was suggested by Representative Chesnick. And I would just quickly say that from our point of view, this is not a tax. This is a fee imposed upon the development of residential or commercial development. And the fundamental question is, who pays for the impacts of the cost of development? Is that a cost that should be borne by the developer, or is that a cost that should be borne by the general public? We believe this bill strikes a good compromise with that, and we're appreciative of the work of Mr. Downing and the County Commissioners Association, and hopefully you'll pass it. Be happy to answer any questions.
and Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Andy Schwartz. I represent the town of Jackson. This issue is not a new issue. In my 8 years in the legislature and my 12 years as a Teton County Commissioner, it has been an ongoing conversation. I'll be very brief. I think the chairman knows I generally am. There are a couple points I'd want to bring up. One, it was asked, this is not voted on by the people. This is imposed by the elected body. In 2022, on the special purpose excise tax, there was $80 million for housing, and it was approved by over 70% of the voters in Teton County. So I don't think there's any doubt that the voters support methods to help create affordable housing. As Mr. Agopian mentioned, we've currently created 1,700 units. This is nurses, teachers, EMTs, firemen. We can't operate our community if they are not living in our community. We've been diligent all these years in making sure we conform to constitutional requirements. But the background, there's a lot of background. The subsidy for a single family home to be affordable is about $500,000, maybe more. We're dealing with a problem that other communities in the state are not dealing with. In the interest of being brief, I will stop now, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to get some insight on how would these state restrictions affect your ability to meet your community's needs?
Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly. We are not opposed to the restrictions in the bill. They're not that much different than the way we are currently doing the exactions. I could get into details, but they will, as long as we are there, the exactions are one of the tools we use to get money for affordable housing. We use SPET, we use private funding. There's other mechanisms, but the bill will, we still want to be able to use exactions as a tool. This bill does not constrain us from doing that.
Representative Bratton, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I just want to ask again to Mr. McCorum about on page 9, do you have the bill in front of you? It does say that we are imposing these fees, giving communities, not just Jackson, which it sounds like this is mostly about, but we will be giving everyone across the state the authority, a new authority to impose these fees for affordable or workforce housing, specifically, a new thing. Would you care to comment on that? I think you thought maybe it didn't do that.
Mr. McLaren.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bratton, yeah, it would give authority across the state for a community to do this. We've been at this probably, 8, 9 years now, and we keep hearing that if it's happening in Jackson, it's going to go to Cody, Sheridan, Laramie, Cheyenne. It hasn't, but it would give authority to do that with the same restrictions and sideboards that Jackson has to do. So we think it's a good thing.
And you believe that you already have the authority to do this under home rule, and if we don't put these sideboards on, then communities can start using these fees regardless if we don't do anything, right?
Yes, sir.
Representative Filer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just, as I look at this, 4%, well, that's my first question. Is 4% good for Teton County or Jackson?
Mr. Schwartz?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Filer, I'm not going to debate the number. We're willing to accept that number.
Okay, and then,
Follow-up?
yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's more of a question or anything, but if we do put these in, where a municipality may impose these fees, at least it doesn't say shall, I guess that leaves it up to that governing body to decide that. But I think this is a great way of actually helping a developer do this. One of the reasons why is many in my county, I believe, it's all up to the developer whether they're building affordable housing or not. All those fees, they have to pay it all. There's usually no partnership for the infrastructure or anything like that, or roads, curb gutter, water, sewer, or anything like that. So usually all that is stuck on the developer. Where if you look at the 4% fee, if a developer, is going to have to pay the 4% of what that project or whatever it costs to, build that home or that dwelling, 4% would a lot of times be a lot cheaper for the developer than what they would actually have to pay if they didn't have this fee. Because I'm not one of I don't like putting regulations on
Is
anybody.
there a question in there? Or?
No, I think am I reading this right? It's kind of what I'm asking everybody here, up here, is am I reading this right, that it actually creates a good uniformity with the 4%, actually helps the developer even more? Is pretty much my question.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Filer, I do believe you're reading that correctly. This gives us some sideboards. It gives us some certainty. It provides those individuals coming to Wyoming communities looking to do developments with some understanding of what could be imposed. And I think it also puts some of the other this all started with a desire to bring forward more opportunities for affordable housing across this state. This is one of those tools that can be utilized in communities going forward. It's a tool that's only been utilized in one community so far, and it certainly has not slowed the pace of development in our community, and it has brought forward cash on the table to partner in projects, large developments over the years.
Very good. So we've heard from a couple of different perspectives. Are there others in the room wishing to testify on this? Anybody on Zoom, Pierre? Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Riemann.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I know a few of the faces here. I don't know some of the rest of you, and I look forward to getting the opportunity to work with you and be a resource. I appreciate your time on this particular topic today. This has been an issue for the Regulatory Reduction Task Force for the past 2 years. And given the seriousness of the issue, I actually sat down over my Christmas break and said, could we possibly develop something that might be a breakthrough in reaching a compromise? And I used the Regulatory Reduction Task Force bill to try and do that. So largely, the bill that's before you follows the framework that they started with. Mr. Chairman, I would say there are lots of compromises. I've heard questions about 4%. You could ask about the 3,000 and the other square footage numbers in there. Those are compromises. I think lots of us would like to see those as different, but it's a compromise. So appreciate you keeping those. Those are sideboards. I did want to just briefly touch on this notion of power. I've heard reference to home rule. To be really clear, if you didn't know, only municipalities in the state of Wyoming have home rule within limitations of our Constitution. The counties are creatures of the state. We operate under what's called Dillon's rule. So we can do those things that you've empowered us to do. I've seen a lot of focus around the language on page 9 and 10, and I just want to say one quick thing. If you went to Title 18, 5201, that is the planning and zoning authorities that you've bestowed on counties in the state. And in particular, the first provision of that says that to promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the county, each Board of County Commissioners may regulate, restrict the location and use of buildings and structures, use, et cetera. It has our power. That's where we would suggest that we have the power to do this sort of thing today. What this bill does is not necessarily say we can do this and have a higher authority. It actually puts those restrictions in. And you heard Mr. Manley talk about the Supreme Court decisions. And if you look at those two provisions right under both of the municipality and county statutes of May, it says, one, we have to have a nexus, which you heard about, and it has to be roughly proportional. LSO changed it to reasonably proportional, but we've got a suggestion for you there. So it's further restricting that. Now, I heard a question earlier about where's this happening in the state of Wyoming? When we did an analysis of the various counties on this issue, Teton County is the only one that has a mitigation program for affordable and workforce housing. But we did find that Laramie County actually has them for parks and other emergency services for developments in the unincorporated county. What this bill would do is largely Teton County, we believe, is meeting the tenets of Nolan and Dolan and Sheets. But Laramie County may not. This is actually going to require them to stand up to a higher level of requirement in order to comply with this particular statute. Mr. Chairman, we did compromise and we are supportive of this legislation as it is written before you. I did pass out an amendment. That was a drafting change that LSO made from the version we handed off to them. They changed the word roughly to reasonably. And understandably, reasonably as a legal term that you all use quite a bit in statutes. That rough proportionality is important in terms of those constitutional cases. So we're just saying change reasonably throughout the bill to roughly. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
All right. It's 10 minutes till 9. Representative Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So would you have any problem with stripping out the language, let's see, on page 9 from 20, just granting all that authority to the county, that additional authority, and on page 10?
Mr. Riemann.
Mr. Chairman, we would be opposed to that sort of thing. Again, this is actually elevating and ensuring that we're complying with the broader constitutional law around this particular issue. And as much as I'm trying to solve a Teton County issue that's been out there for some time, I'm also here to protect the other counties that are operating in this space to do other things for their communities. So we would be opposed to removing that language.
Representative Chesed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, would you, if we were to strip out all of 15.1.103, the A and B, and also 18.2.101, would you believe that stripping those out would then revert us back to this current situation where there's no limits on these fees? The counties and the municipalities can do these anyway without these restrictions?
Mr. Raymond.
Mr. Chairman, it just leaves us in this sort of weird legal space. I still think that the constitutional decisions around this would govern. I think it's just clearer to put it in there and put those limitations. And if I can just quickly, I didn't make this language up when I put this piece together. It was straight out of Utah State Code. And I'm happy to give that to you. It's 1727A507. They put similar restrictions in place for these exaction and mitigation fees. They had a particular interest in the water issue, and so they expand and put some limitations around that. Here, we're just, we go in further on affordable housing.
Okay, yeah. Can I get a show of hands in the room? Is there anybody else wishing to testify on this bill? Okay. Representative Lean? No question? All right. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Raymond, for being here today. And you say there's no one on Zoom, Pierre? Okay. No one else wishing to testify? I'm going to close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Chesed, second by Vice Chair Singh. Amendments on the bill. Representative Chesed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that the word reasonably be changed to roughly wherever it appears in the bill. Again, this is to comply with the Sheets case, which uses the term roughly proportional. So I make that motion.
You've got a copy here? Yes. Okay, yep. Says there a second to that amendment?
I'll second it.
Second by Vice Chairman. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Filer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering with the sponsors of the bill, Representative Davis, and I see Representative Byron here. Are you guys all good with this amendment too? Okay, that's all I needed.
We have a head bob that works. No further discussion on the amendment. All those in favor of the proposed amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That amendment has carried. Pierre? Further amendments? Representative Bratton.
I'd like to have an amendment that we delete the language, so on page 9, all that under 15.1.103, and also the language that was added under the general powers on page 10, 16 through, I guess 4, on page 11.
All right, so page 9, striking everything line 16 to the bottom of the page.
Yes, thank you.
And then on page 10, striking which lines?
Just 1 through 4, the rest of that, the rest of that. 1 through 4.
Yeah. And lines 1 through 4 on page 10. That's the amendment. Is there a second? Seeing none, amendment fails. Further amendments? Seeing none, discussion, comments on the bill. Representative Chesed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a good bill. I am in favor of the bill. We've had a little bit of discussion about home rule, which is an interesting topic in Wyoming. It's a kind of a mixed bag. Municipalities have some form of home rule. Dillon's rule is a kind of a limited form of Dillon's, no, I'm sorry. Dillon's rule is the opposite. Local governments have some limited forms of home rule. Counties do not. They do operate under Dillon's rule, which is basically the state delegates whatever powers they have. And this, to some extent, this limits home rule. This is a statewide top-down thing, so that kind of bothers me. But because it has been worked on by, all the parties have apparently worked hard on this and reached some compromises. It does, I think, put some reasonable limitations. It complies with the Sheets case. I am in support of this. I will probably want to bring a committee of the whole amendment to include some kind of requirement. It's hinted at, but not really specified, that the monies collected by these exaction fees should be actually spent on the infrastructure and affordable housing purposes. It's not quite clear. I'd like to make that more clear. So I'll work on that as a committee of the whole amendment. But I do want to advance this bill forward so that we can add that. And if anything we can do to facilitate the building of affordable housing, which is business friendly. Businesses won't locate here if they can't have workers living nearby to work in their businesses. And if you can't have affordable housing, you don't have a workforce. Workforces are important for business, and therefore I think this is a very business friendly bill, and I therefore support it.
Representative Filer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Kind of along the lines, my colleague next to me, I'm going to vote for this to move it forward, but I think we really need to work with it with the rest of the House. But I do have some concerns with it. I totally get the idea of it, where it could possibly help a certain developer, something that's actually in this market, just to build affordable housing. But I also don't want to restrict the limitations on private property rights either. So I think this, if it's a good compromise between the two, but I still would like to make sure some developers have that opportunity to make sure we don't limit them either. But I think it's something we can work out on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill does provide guardrails, but at the same time, the guardrails are being applied to a power that this bill would specifically codify for the entire state. And that's more than a guardrail. It creates a new power and a new policy authority and statute that doesn't exist currently. And it really hasn't been thoroughly discussed and vetted. Nobel Prize economists have long argued against policies of exaction fees for affordable housing. That would be Hayek and Locke and Bastiat and Thomas Sowell. Many studies, both peer-reviewed and not, have shown this policy is bad economic policy. There are many examples nationwide where this policy of exaction fees has been a failure. If anybody wants to see my peer-reviewed studies, I have 5 peer-reviewed studies and five that aren't, and I could talk about other places personally that I've seen where it's been a failure. Exaction fees for affordable housing result in negative outcomes and make housing more expensive. This is a massive policy decision, and I believe it should be studied in the interim. I'll be a no. Thank you.
Further discussion? I'd just like to say, I think the issues could be different in different communities. We're talking about workforce housing kind of in this bill, but another community might be trying to address some other issue by using the same mechanism of exaction fees. So I urge some caution as we think about what the funds can be used for on further amendments. But with that, Pierre, why don't you call the roll on 197?
Representative Brady?
No.
Representative Breton,
No.
Representative Chestick,
Aye.
Representative Filer,
Aye.
Representative Kelly,
No.
Representative Lean,
No.
Representative Singh,
No.
Representative Webb,
No.
Chairman Washut.
Aye.
3 ayes, 6 noes.
And with that, House Bill 197 is not passed committee of the Judiciary. It takes us now to House Bill 189, Representative Lean. Good morning. Please introduce us to House Bill 189.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thank you for hearing me today. Today I bring to you House Bill 189. It has to do with the grooming of our children, not in a sense of combing their hair, but in a sense of using them for sexual exploitation. I sit before you today with some statistics from the Natrona County Child Advocacy Center. 474 children had been served. 192 of those children were ages 0 to 6. 174 were ages 7 to 12. 106 were ages 13 to 18. And 306 of these 474 cases had to do with sexual abuse. The offenders that had to do with these cases, 138 of them were parent to the victim, 45 of them were a step-parent to the victim, 79 of them were other relatives, 94 of them were the parent's boyfriend or girlfriend, and 73 of them were unrelated person known to the victim. This is only one advocacy center in the state, and that is astounding statistics to me. When you look at this nationally, in 2024, there was 381,364 children served for these cases. There was 298,822 different offenders, and of sexual abuse, there was 236,601 cases. Today, I bring before you a piece of legislation that will help fill a void within the Wyoming law where an individual may speak to a child in a sexual manner or send inappropriate pictures of genital matter without being charged with a crime. And we need to solve that problem for our children and for our law enforcement. You see, there was a story recently in Hudson of a man that had 3 binders of information that came to speak to another individual about his attempt to speak to who he thought was a 13-year-old girl, but instead it ended up being a man that was a decoy and his wife. The cops were unable to prosecute this man for that particular crime of trying to establish a sexual relationship with an actor that he thought was a 13-year-old girl. But instead, they did find child pornography on his electronic devices, and they were able to charge him with that. All across our country, there are stories of adults grooming children for sexual gratification, and I know that Wyoming can protect our youth, and that is why this is before you. So today, I'll walk you through the bill. We're going to create a new section, 62321, and then I'm going to move straight to page 2. It walks you through what obscene means. And there's different levels of obscene there, so that it could be sexualized descriptions of human body parts or descriptions of sexual contact, that kind of thing. Moving on to page 3, just in the essence of time, I know we're up against a clock today. On page 11, it talks about a pattern of communication. I set this bar very low at 2, but I am open to amendments if we want it to be greater than that. I believe that if one person does it one time and they make an honest mistake, that is something. But if you do it a second time, you're likely to continue to repeat. And that is why I set that bar at 2. And then there's a definition for personal sexual gratification, and that carries you over to page 4. There is an exception starting on page 4, line 11, where it gives circumstances that a person is guilty of sexual communication with a minor if not less than 18 years old, older, or knowingly engages in a pattern of written, electronic, or verbal communication with a person less than the age of 18, a person purported to be less than the age of 18. We want to make sure that any strings that are attached to this person are moving forward, and that 4 years is the age gap listed for the victim, to make sure that we aren't encompassing, say, a young individual that is 19 years old that is dating a 17-year-old, that we want to make sure that those individuals have the right to that consensual relationship. Moving on to page 5, it talks about the punishments for these crimes that they're committed. And I did do a tier section, and I will bring an amendment that says and/or for each one of the offenses, so that our judges do have the leeway to be able to bring in the fine and the jail time, or both, depending on the severity of the crime. I do want to mention that after the third offense, I do request that this person be prohibited from using social media during a period of incarceration, probation, or parole. And that the forfeiture of devices, that they'll lose those if they're communicating with minors for law enforcement to be able to collect the evidence. And that if you move on to page 6, down at line 14 to 18, it does give you some exemptions of a bona fide school, college, university activities, that these do not apply to those educational opportunities. So that if you are in a school and you are being taught sex ed in a health course, you are not going to be punished by these crimes. And then moving on to page 7, this is where if you have been convicted or are repeat violation the third time or more, that you would be required to be registered as a sex offender, because any child that is harmed through this crime, if they stand the potential to be able to make contact with that individual, the damage that will be done to that child is irreparable, and it could be generational if that child isn't given the opportunity to get help to correct what has happened to them. And then it moves you on to enactment on page 8, that this take effect immediately for those cases that are currently being investigated by law enforcement, or that they may potentially know about, but they aren't acting on starting that investigation. This would give them the opportunity to do so. And in conclusion, I just want to say that this solves the gray area for law enforcement and for our children, so that we can make sure that we're giving our children the best laws out there to protect them and their parents. I do have some amendments for the bill that I'm happy to, that have come about as I've been discussing them, and that I'm happy to bring forward. If you want me to review them now, I will, or we can do that later. I know we're up against
Do you
time.
have copies?
Yes,
Give them to Pierre.
or I can give them to Pierre and.
Sorry, do we have them in our folder?
Can I give these to you?
Representative Lean, just on page 7, line 19, it just appears a little bit odd that at the end of the sentence, we say 3 working days, and then we have a hyphen and the word any. Was that a drafting error? Is there supposed to be a new paragraph there, or what's going on with that language?
Yes, this is one of the amendments that one of the amendments does address this.
Okay, further questions on Representative Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking here at a potential perpetrator. I'm looking for language that says an individual, there's a direct communication to a specific individual. I'm thinking here about, could somebody get caught up in this law for perhaps putting adult humor on social media that a minor sees, if it's not specified that they're actually targeting a specific person?
Representative Lean.
Representative Kelly, I walk you back through on the first part of the bill where it talks about a pattern of communication. Under section 8, it says directed towards the same minor or perpetuated minor. So this would be something that is intentionally going to the same person repetitively. under pattern of communication on page 3, line 14. So in that instance, I would see it to be just a once-over fluke thing. This would be an intentional direct communication via an instant chat, a text message, an email, that kind of thing.
Further questions? Vice Chairman Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lean, how would this affect communications between two minors?
Representative Lean?
One of the amendments that I have is to draw a little clarity to that, so that the two consensual teenagers or young adults are not going to end up being able to prosecute each other if they're in a consensual relationship, having consensual conversations. So I do have an amendment for that.
Maybe we ought to see the amendments before we keep asking questions that are responded to.
Or I could
by
read
the-
them if you want me to read them.
Yeah, why don't you just tell us about the amendments, where they fit in and what they address?
The First Amendment would be page 4, the end of line 19, enter a semicolon, and then add the word "and." Oh, okay. There's 5 altogether.
Please proceed.
The purpose is, as you read it, the Romanettes 1 through 4, and then satisfied under subsection B, and then that there's an "and" at the end of at the end of 3, and then to add 1 through 2. And then amendment number 2 on page 6, lines 10 through 12, strike the language in subparagraph F and replace it with "A minor victim or the minor's parents or legal guardian acting on behalf of the minor may bring a civil cause of action under this section for damages and other relief of the courts deemed reasonable. The ability of a parent or legal guardian to bring a civil action on behalf of the minor shall not preclude the minor from bringing such an action independently upon reaching the age of majority." And this just ensures that the parent or guardian can bring a civil suit if the minor is unable to do so, or it retains the right for the minor to do so once they reach the age of 18. Moving on to 3, page 6, line 19, a new subparagraph for H. This is the close age exception. The provisions of this section shall not apply to consensual communication between an individual who is at least 18 years of age and a minor who is less than 4 years younger than the individual, provided that the communication does not involve coercion, exploitation, or manipulation to the minor, and that the communication occurs within the context of the consensual dating or romantic relationship. This is ambiguity in enforcement and could lead to scrutiny of close age relationships if the communication includes the obscene content. And then on page 4, or let's see, amendment 4 would be page 6, line 19, new subparagraph H, and then a renumbering if it's adopted. Criminal prosecution under this section shall be initiated by law enforcement and pursued by the state's prosecuting authority. The civil cause of action in subsection F is independent of criminal proceedings and may be brought by the minor or the minor's legal representative, regardless of whether criminal charges have been filed. A civil action under this section is not to be contingent upon the conviction in a criminal case. And on amendment 5 is page 6, line 19. Nothing in this section shall require a minor to obtain parental or guardian consent before reporting a violation to law enforcement or participating in a criminal investigation or prosecution. However, minors may involve a parent or guardian at their discretion. The law enforcement shall take reasonable measures to ensure the safety and well-being of the minor throughout the investigation process. And this is because protecting minors' ability to report the abuse without parental consent in case the parent is involved and is uncooperative or part of the issue, or still allows the parental involvement when appropriate, but makes it optional rather than a barrier to justice.
Thank you for these proposed amendments. Where did they come from? What was the source of these amendments? Somebody contact you after you proposed legislation with suggestions?
Yes, in walking through with some legal staff and with people that I asked to co-sponsor the bill, these are amendments that came forward to give clarity both for those that have been harmed and law enforcement.
Representative Filer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we talk a lot about 18, that's our adult age, but in the state of Wyoming, the age of consent is 17. So with the consent side of things, it pretty much allows a 17-year-old to be an adult when it comes to sexual whatever, right? So would this law, with our way our current statutes are with the age of consent at 17, would this law, if we was to pass this through, conflict with that and possibly create a lot of cases that may or may not need to be cases, if that makes sense?
Representative Lean?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Filer, I left my green book there next to you, but I can show you the age of consent is 18. We do have a provisional law in Wyoming that allows 16-year-olds to marry with parental consent. And so I do have a tentative in mind amendment for those that get married that need the authority to be able to speak to their spouse at that time, but I did not draft one for anybody to be able to read. So I am open and friendly to that. My intent is not to harm teenagers in their consensual relationships. My goal in this piece of legislation is to close the gray area where youth are being harmed for individuals that think, a 35-year-old individual may be grooming a 16 or 17-year-old, and that's not acceptable.
Representative Chesty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lean, thank you for bringing this bill. I have a question on page 6, line 16, existing paragraph G, and it's the word bona fide. And I understand the purpose of this, and I agree with the purpose of it. You're trying to create space for sex education programs and things like that to go on in schools and colleges, and that's a great objective, and I think it's a necessary piece. I'm just worried about bona fide. It's a very vague standard, and I'm not quite sure. It can be interpreted differently by different people, and I don't know if it requires an inquiry into the state of mind of the person who is doing these communications. Would you be amenable to an amendment that specifies sex education courses to make it a more concrete standard so we get at what you're trying to get at?
Representative Lean?
Chairman, Representative Chestick, yes, I'm open to that amendment. Thank you for your patience with me, as this is the first piece of legislation I have ever written.
Very good. And another option there would just be maybe accredited school or college or university, something a little more,
We can work on
something tighter, yeah. All right, others in the room wishing to testify on House Bill 189. Ms. Chambers, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Kara Chambers. I am the Director of the Division of Victim Services within the Wyoming Attorney General's Office. And I also serve as the legislative liaison, and in that capacity, I'm here kind of on behalf of DCI. I want to apologize to the 4 members of the committee who are on this bill that I haven't had a chance to talk to you beforehand. My office administers 6 federal grants for 57 programs, and my day yesterday got a little busy with some panicked individuals. But at any rate, I really, we just caught one little thing that we want to address, and it is on page 2, line 3. And that is maybe just a small tweak oversight. We would suggest that the language or purported minor gets added to the definition of obscene. And that was just to capture, I believe, what Representative Lean testified to, these situations. And you see that on page 3, line 15. I think it was just a small oversight there to match, the definition of what we're looking at, which is on page 4, Roman numeral 1, line 17 through 19, which is, we're talking about the victim being a person less than the age of 18 years old or a person purported to be less than the age of 18 years old. And of course, this impacts DCI's Internet Crimes Against Children agents who might be running, I guess, what would be called a sting operation, or similar to what you testified to on that, the whole kind of catch a predator type concept.
So, Ms. Chambers, is DCI's position that this actually does fill a void in our existing statutes in these types of grooming situations?
Chairman Washit, I believe, DCI hasn't stated an opinion on that, and we don't really stand in support or oppose. This is a policy decision. But I will remind the two who have been on Judiciary before, and for the rest of you who are new, that we had testimony during 2 interims ago about the lack of obscenity definitions in a law requiring those convicted of obscenity to register, and I believe that this fills that gap.
Further questions, Ms. Chambers? Hearing none, thank you for
Thank
your
you.
testimony this morning. Others in the room wishing to testify? Good morning. This is a new face, so just relax and make sure the little green button's on. Introduce yourself for the record, and then tell us what you'd like us to hear, sending all your comments through the chair.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I stand before you today as a mother of 4 children growing up in this digital age. Every parent in Wyoming knows the reality that we face. Our kids live in a world where their smartphone connects them not just to friends and family, but to hidden predators who can reach them anywhere, anytime they choose. When I send my children to bed each night, I know that just beyond their screens, there are those waiting to exploit their trust, their innocence, and their vulnerability. This bill addresses a critical gap in our current legal framework. Right now, predators can engage in grooming behavior, sending sexually explicit messages, attempting to normalize inappropriate relationships, and systematically breaking down our children's natural defenses while staying just outside the reach of our current laws. They know exactly where the legal lines are, and they expertly manipulate those boundaries. Let me be clear about what we are seeing. Adults, specifically targeting minors, engaging in patterns of sexual communication for their own gratification. They're not breaking existing laws yet, they're just talking. But these aren't innocent conversations. These are calculated efforts to desensitize our children to sexual content, to normalize inappropriate relationships, and to prepare them for exploitation. HB 189 gives us the tools to stop this behavior before it escalates to physical abuse. It creates clear, enforceable standards about what constitutes inappropriate sexual communication with minors, and it establishes meaningful penalties that reflect the serious nature of these crimes. And crucially, it gives victims and their families a civil cause of action to seek justice. The graduated penalty structure sends a clear message. First offenses are serious, but repeat offenders will face increasingly severe consequences, and this reflects what we know about predatory behavior. It rarely stops with just one victim. Wyoming has always been a state that protects its children. We pride ourselves on our family values and our commitment to the next generation. This bill represents those values in action. It gives law enforcement and prosecutors the tools they need to protect our children in the digital age. Every hour we wait, every day we delay, predators are reaching out to Wyoming's children, testing boundaries and looking for vulnerabilities. They become bolder and more sophisticated because they know our current laws can't touch them. They count on our hesitation, they exploit our legal gaps, and they target our children. So I urge this committee to please advance House Bill 189. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. McCoy, you did very well. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Questions for? Thanks for speaking up for kids. Mr. Thompson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of WASCOP, the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And as the testimony we heard already this morning, WASCOP is also hasn't taken an official position on this, but we do see it as a mechanism to kind of fill in a void that does exist. So in existing law right now, somebody 15 years old that is sent a image that meets certain definitions could be the victim of the existing law, but nothing currently would prohibit them from sending that image to other people, and until that other person possesses it or does something with it come to light. So this helps fill that void, not only with obscene communication, but also the request of images. So I think this completes the cycle of activity that we see around this grooming behavior. I would just like to add that we heard some amendments discussed today for the very first time that mention law enforcement specifically. We'd have to take a look at those and see what that really real impact is, because when you're talking to a juvenile without a parent's knowledge, we already have practices in place in law enforcement to deal with those if that parent's a suspect, or we have other opportunities for victim services coordinators to help us with that process. So some of that language might be something that we want to look at to adjust a little bit, but we'll address that when we see if any of that is adopted. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, if you have any.
I sense that the sponsor of the bill would be amenable to working with you on those language things. My question is, the penalties, are they consistent with other crimes? I'm getting a head nod from Ms. Chambers, so we'll call that good. Representative Filer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I totally get the whole idea of this bill. I totally get it, to protect our kids and stuff. But I want to ask, strictly law enforcement. I'll be honest, in the last 2 weeks, I've had my identity stolen through my bank account. Thousands of dollars was stolen, different things like that. I've also had on social media where somebody has hacked into my account and then started sending off other friend requests and all these different things. And after going through the processes, I had to, there's stuff I had to turn into law enforcement when I, have my identity taken or whatever it is. The only problem I see is when we have to go through these social media sites, a lot of times they have rules and regulations in place where they can't give all the information needed. They also can't find it. I had to recreate 2 different social media accounts because of somebody hacking it. That's my only fear with this, is if that does happen, what happens a lot of times, especially when we're talking about sexual abuse of a minor or something towards that, a lot of these people, there'll be a sheriff at their house. They're gonna knock on their door when it's turned in. Next thing you know, you're getting arrested. And now you're gonna have to try to prove your innocence and have to fight through a social media network, their policies, hire attorneys, and all these different things to get you cleared. But in the meantime, your name has just been ran through the mud in your community over something of not your fault. And I think we could probably work on something in this bill to help with that. I mean, I don't know how to do that. I'd probably ask law enforcement to work with Representative Lean and because I'd like to make sure that those protections are, because my identity was just hacked this last 2 weeks, guys. And I'm still fighting it right now. So I just want to make sure some protections are in there, and we're not going after people that are good people that just somebody stole their identity. Thanks. And I don't know if there's process for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Filer, that problem exists in a litany of statutes across the board already. And that's where it's incumbent on law enforcement to do a thorough investigation and make sure that IP addresses and things like that match. Now, we're starting to get into territory that ICAC usually covers that I'm wholly not qualified to speak about. But those kind of issues, I think, would be best addressed through questioning their staff and looking at existing statute. I don't know of a single statute of this nature that has identity theft protections written into it, as the identity theft protections are a separate and applicable process to all statute. So I don't see it as in my limited experience with this type of crime, I think there's clues along the way that indicate that this name or likeness that's being used might not be the actual person.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Others in the room wishing to testify? Good morning, sir. Introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name's Ken Blackburn. I'm the sheriff of Bighorn County. I've served for 5 terms in my county, northern Wyoming. To address Representative Filer's concerns, this is a very valid concern that we in law enforcement take very seriously as an active duty law enforcement officer. And as someone who was also just hacked within the last week, not to the extent it sounds like of you, but the burden of proof for law enforcement is beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof in civil is a preponderance of evidence. So in other words, mathematically, and this isn't completely accurate, but mathematically a civil course is I'm 51% right and the other guy's 49% right. So that's 2% can make the decision as far as is that the burden of proof. In a beyond a reasonable doubt situation, it is a, let's say 95% right, 5% to 10% wrong, which speaks to the 10% that we have to be careful of. I think we as a legislator and as the law enforcement executive branch of the government, we need to keep in mind that element of the Constitution. As a active law enforcement officer that has some experience in this, considerable actually, not the ICAC or DCI level experience, these guys are the best. I would speak out that our ICAC unit is recognized as one of the best in the nation. If you look in the Level Chronicle, look it up last week, it's a newspaper. There was a recent conviction of a young man that the crime occurred in Wyoming, and it was perpetrated in Texas. A young man was trying to meet up, well, not a young man, a 40-year-old man was trying to meet up with underage children, and that was done over the internet. There was a great deal of investigation that went into that to make sure that that was indeed the individual. A similar investigation several years ago in Bighorn County, a adult male was grooming a young lady in our local high school, and we took that investigation. We did that. One of our deputies became the young girl and had that communication, and we were very careful to make sure that we had the right person at the right time. I totally wholeheartedly understand as a sheriff, my job and my authority comes from the people. My responsibility to the citizens of my county and my constituents is to protect them and to protect them from bad guys and to also protect them from the police and to make sure that that is done very carefully. And I want to tell you that while there are dirty law enforcement officers out there, there are by and large, the multitude of them are doing the job for the right reasons, to do a good job, to do things correctly, and nobody wants to wrongfully charge somebody. I do take pride in doing a good job. I take pride in taking bad guys off the street. The right ones, the right time, and we need to also trust our law enforcement on occasion that we are going to do that. There is a checks and balances, and that is in the court. I totally understand soiling a good name. It's something that's not done lightly, and we do that appropriately within the guides of the Constitution. I'm sorry, I'll take questions. I know you guys are on a time frame.
Thank you, Sheriff, for being here this morning. Representative Chestic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Sheriff Blackburn, thank you for being here. I'd just like to get you to weigh in on a question that's been asked to other witnesses. Do you think that this bill fills a gap in our current statutes, and if so, what is that gap?
Sure.
Thank you, Representative, Mr. Chairman. I do not speak for my associations, the Wyoming Sheriff Association, the WASCOP, Wyoming Associations of Chiefs of Police. I do not speak for them. I'm speaking as an individual law enforcement officer. I've had a lot of problems in the past with this gap, being able to actually do something about very difficult situations. We've had to set up stings, get them to that point. To answer your question, if you put a dog on a chain, he'll run at that chain a time or two, and then pretty quick he'll figure out just how far he can go, and he'll actually stop before he hits the end of that chain. Our bad guys know that. They know exactly how far they can go. They know what they can do. And I'm not for making more laws. I'm not for making things more difficult, but I am for protecting our kids. And I do think that anything we can do to protect our kids, within reason is very appropriate. So I would go on record as supporting this with proper amendments, with the proper working with law enforcement and with DCI, the Attorney General's office, and victim services.
So Sheriff, just kind of off the subject, so Sheriff, one question. A little bit off topic, but is there an ICAC task force in your neck of the woods? I think I heard one time that we have ICAC teams in various places around the state, but the Northwest may not have one. Is that true?
So I'm not the right guy to talk about DCI. I work with DCI very closely. Our Northwest Task Force covers the Bighorn Basin, and that would be there. The last, I honestly, Mr. Chairman, I can't exactly answer that, but we have access. I would say we need more, but we do have access to ICAC, and we can call and write a letter to the director whenever we have something that we can't handle. And I would say, as far as community analysis on any crime, a lot of times the division is just as stressed and strapped as we are for being able to have manpower to handle these things. The bigger issue is expertise to handle these things. We deal with a lot of different types of crime in Wyoming because we're rural. We don't see the volume of this that the ICAC units would. And so being able to have enough trained people to do this effectively would be the bigger issue. Do we have someone there right now? I can't answer. I can answer the last time I requested ICAC, I did get assistance.
Thank you very much. Interim President Costin, you're the last one in the room. Are you going to testify on the bona fide? Okay, all right, we got that covered. All right, no one else on Zoom? No one else in the room? Any rebuttal from the Attorney General over there? Oh, okay. Committee, we're going to close public hearing, public comment. Committee, what's your preference? Move the bill by Filer, second by Vice Chair Singh. Any amendments? Do we want to take up these amendments today? Representative Lane.
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification, could we run these as one amendment, or do they need to be the 1, 2, 3, 4?
It can be one lengthy amendment.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt what is in front of you as labeled Amendment 1, 2, 3, and 4 as one amendment. And I do not want to do 5. If there's a second, I'll explain why.
Second by Representative Bratton.
Thank you. Number 5, I just want to work with Mr. Thompson and make sure that we're getting the adequate language involved to make sure that law enforcement's not being hindered.
Sure, we do that as committee of the whole amendment, or second reading amendment. So we have this amendment in front of us. Any questions, comments on the amendment proposed by the sponsor? Seeing none. All in favor of this amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. So that's amendment 1, 2, 3, and 4, just adopted. Further amendments on the bill. Representative Shestak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, line 3, I would like to insert at the end of the line before the colon, or purported minor, to allow for the sting operations.
So we're on
page 2, line 3, insert or purported minor before the colon.
Page 2, line 3, or purported minor. We have that, Pierre. Second by Representative Lean. Discussion on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We have that amendment, Pierre. Very good. Any further amendments? Representative Shestak, did you want to attend to bona fide?
I'd like to work, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll work with the bringer to work on the language of that. I'm not quite sure what the language should be, and I want to think about it a little bit, so we'll work on that as a committee of the whole amendment.
Okay, further amendments, Pierre? Sponsor, you want to comment on that?
Yes, Pierre, if you were willing.
So you go and need an amendment. You want to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Filer.
I'll move that motion with the LSO staff there that put that into our attention to put that same language in as we did the last amendment on page
Do we
2.
get page and line?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. I'm sorry, it's page, was it page 6, line
8.
8? It would be this, I guess the same would be delete the period and put
Or purported minors.
or purported minors, yeah.
You have that now, Pierre? We're on page 6, line 8. After minors, inserting or purported minor, period. Also page 4, line 13, is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can we add that to my amendment there on page 4, line 13, after minor, put or perpetrate minor also?
Very
So we don't
good.
have to
You
do
got
2
that?
different ones.
Minor or purported minor.
Yeah.
Are there any others?
Checking. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. I don't see another one.
Okay, so I think
Of course,
that's
that was a
it.
quick scan, but
It's all in one amendment for the conforming purported minor committee. Everybody clear on what we're voting on? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, one more.
The sponsor?
On page 5, line 12, after the word and, insert or. And then on line 17, after the word and, insert or. And then on page 5, line 22, after the word and, insert or.
Okay, you got that? Representative Justic, are you seconding or do you have a comment? We need a second on the amendment.
I'll second it so I can
Okay,
discuss it.
for a
and maybe
second discussion?
Suggest
Representative Justic.
suggest a friendly amendment. And this is, I apologize for going law professor on you again, or legal writing professor on you, but and/or is inherently ambiguous. Which is it? Is it and or is it or? So a better way to phrase that would be to a fine of not more than $1,000, comma, yeah, and, yeah, instead of, or not more, a fine of not more than $1,000 or both at the end of the line, basically. So that makes it clear that you have a choice, you can do one or the other or both. But putting and or is just inherently ambiguous. That's a
Mr. Chairman.
technical legal writing thing.
So at the end of each of those, is that a friendly amendment? We just change it to or both, standard,
Yeah.
okay? Everybody clear on what we're voting on? We're gonna make it so that each of these penalties are fines or imprisonment or both. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That passes. Further amendments? You're gonna have a fine bill when we're done here.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question for the bringer of the bill and maybe for any additional help here. But how would this affect a situation where a minor was lying about their age and was telling someone that they were older than 18, and then they engaged in that communication?
Representative Lee?
I would like to phone a friend, Mr. Chairman, with Mr. Alan Thompson. Is there already a law for that, or victim services?
Okay. We've closed public comment, so this is just responsive to the question.
Sorry.
That's right. You phoned two friends.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I brought my partner up here that knows a lot more about this than I do, Alan Thompson with WASCOP. So generally speaking, law enforcement understands that the intent of law. So if the evidence would show that a 13-year-old purported to be a 19-year-old, there's officer discretion involved in filing that case, consulting with the county attorney. I'm not aware off the top of my head if it's a defense for these types of crimes and if that exists elsewhere. But I would defer to Ms. Chambers if she has any other input.
Chairman.
Ms. Chambers.
Chairman Washit, and I don't recall who, Vice Chairman Singh. Caveat, have a law degree, do not practice in this area anymore as I'm a director, but I would say that that would certainly be a defense that someone could bring, that they reasonably believed that they were communicating with another adult. I know there are provisions of the law where there is language where you can bring an affirmative defense, but I'm not, crimes against children in this type of law is very convoluted, so I don't want to, hand on the Bible say absolutely, but I believe that that would be a defense, so to speak.
Could we
and would
ask
be
you
part
to-
of the investigation.
Ms.
Pardon me.
Chambers, maybe continue a dialogue with the sponsor of the bill, and if there's needed affirmative defense language or something, we can add that committee of the whole. Representative Chestic.
If I could just add my 2 cents here, I think these crimes are specific intent crimes, and if you specifically intend to have sex with somebody under 18, having somebody lie to you about their age negates the intent element of the crime. So I'm not sure we need it, but that's my 2 cents just off the top of my head.
We'll take 2 cents from a law
There you
professor
go.
any day.
Amen.
Further questions? Further comments on the bill before we vote?
Mr. Chairman, one real fast one. Mr. Chairman.
Representative Filer.
I love this bill. I'm going to vote for it. But I still think I would like probably talk to law enforcement stuff again on the civil side of it. Because if your identity was stolen, could a parent actually come out and file charges against you civilly prior to a charge being charged against you? Because we can almost sue anybody we want, right? So if a parent is to come out and charge, somebody stole your identity and they come knocking on your door, serve you paperwork, now you're going to court civilly over something you didn't do, it still runs your name through the mud because those documents are public. So is there any protections in that part? It's so out there. This is probably just something I could probably talk with you all later about, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
But I'm
you.
an aye vote.
Further comments, committee? Representative Webb? Nope. All right, call the roll on 189.
Representative Brady,
Aye.
Representative Breton,
Aye.
Representative Chestek,
Aye.
Representative Filer,
Aye.
Representative Kelly,
Aye.
Representative Lean,
Aye.
Representative Singh,
Aye.
Representative Webb,
Aye.
Chairman Washit.
Aye.
9 ayes.
The sponsor will carry the bill on the floor. Very good. All right. Well, that concludes House Judiciary for today. We'll be back on Friday to deal with House Bill 166, State Auditor Payment Transparency, and House Bill 234, Second Amendment, Financial Privacy.